So, hello enthusiasts, passionate people, fellow musicians. My name is Alfred Darlington. I make music as Daedelus, mostly in the realm of electronic music, but sometimes otherwise, sometimes jazz or hip hop. But it's all sound, and that's what I'd like to talk to you about today. It's just some sound matters. I think it's important to all of us.
Howdy, hi, thanks so much for coming out. I know this is a somewhat, it's like an intimate setting. It's not like a normal club where the lights might be low and we all are a little bit blurry, even if it is very clear-eyed, so to speak. So let's make this informal, and if something comes up, there are people all around you, both the people who work here at Switched On, but also, and myself guesting in today, but also the community that's right next to you. They might have answers to questions. So feel free to either keep that in your back pocket or just share it with the person around you, and we'll hopefully just like demystify, but also just like talk it out. Because I'm sure you guys are all experts anyways. If you found your way here, you already know what's going on, but just in case, and especially for the people who maybe are watching later, your questions might be really useful to somebody who might be undergoing some of the same, just wonders. So I come from a background in live instruments. I've studied double bass in college, jazz bass specifically, and then also bass clarinet. Not the most, let's just say like a little awkward, just a teeny bit awkward, both instruments. Ungainly and then also just bizarre. The bass clarinet is this woofy, wonderful thing. So I loved it. I loved sound and resonance and the ability to kind of play into the music, lean into the music in ways that was always necessary to have an ensemble, but still like the chance to really imbibe this beautiful musical traditions, the Great American Songbook in terms of jazz and the odd classical piece. But it never was me. It never was my voice. I didn't know how to express myself in that music. So I oftentimes found myself wondering how people did it, especially solo musicians. Like, I loved electronic music, but it seemed so intimidating. And when I was really young, I thought the DJ made all the music anyways. And I was woefully, wonderfully wrong about that one. I think, how do they do it? All those changes. And, but now we're here and it's happening. So needless to say, my first fidgets, when I finally broke away from those great traditions, was electronics. Like, was finally figuring out synthesis. I went to school for 3 years for jazz bass, and the best advice I ever got from my jazz teacher was to quit playing jazz. It was the best. It was painful, but it was the best because that freed me up to explore more electronics. And my first set of classes that I took were these modular synth patching classes. And this was at an institution, I don't want to call anybody out, this was at an institution that was quite storied, but the height of their technology was a twin patch bay Moog that I could mess with. Beautiful instrument, and this was in the late 90s, so not that long ago, but long enough ago that was wonderful. So I took that class the maximum number of times they allowed me, and I learned some things about signal path. Now, that signal path idea is totally divorced from what's in front of me right now, just in the sense of just like really raw VCOs into amps, into that thing. But it's not so dissimilar from the intentions that I had coming out of that moment. So out of college, I'm in the world trying to find a voice in the kind of amount of technology. Very, very thankfully, one of the very first things I encounter is this company that was a very fledgling at the time that was going to go under the name Monome eventually. The Monome is a grid-based controller that allows you to take its OSC output and bridge that over to a computer or other similar systems and basically use it as a control. And it, amongst other instruments, formed kind of the basis of this controllerism idea. The idea that an instrument didn't need to have a resonator to be performable. The idea that a computer itself could somehow be imbued with the ability to be kind of seen as being an instrument, and that the sound system was what you were playing at essence. So these are lovely ideas, and I think in a lot of ways was profound, and still is profound. There's still amazing ways of getting away from traditional instrumentation and still finding a way of having that impact in audience. That being said, I'm now on a new evolutionary step in my own growth where I'm trying to get away from the laptop. The laptop to my right now is actually not for performance. It is just there to show something up on the screen. So I'm attempting to divorce from that, partially because I've noticed over time that screens for myself represent a very interior space, a very socialized social media space, and not nearly the kind of performative gestures that I want to be proposing. I don't think there's anything wrong with a control system that empowers you to do grand gestures away from what my 10 fingers are proposing, like what possible. But I do think the computer is a brick wall that's really hard to hit my head through, personally. That was the conundrum I was finding. And I've been feeling it for a while, but I didn't know. I didn't know partially that modular synthesis has made such progression that's allowing what I'm doing now possible, which has only been made possible very recently, and I'll discuss that in greater detail in a second. But also, I just had let myself get quiet about it. I had stopped asking questions of the greater community about what is else out there. I thought I kind of knew because I would go out to shows and see people doing the same things, doing their CDJ gesture, doing their turntable gesture, doing their controller setup, like delicately, precariously perched up on top of the turntables kind of thing. And it just always seemed like the same cycle. And so I just thought, okay, that's it. But it's never the case. There's way too many makers, way too many clever people doing incredible things. And so I finally broke down and started to kind of to see what at least the tip of the iceberg was in terms of modular. I'm very lucky to be living in Los Angeles. There's a great store there that carries a lot. There's places like this here, Switched On, which indeed has like mountainous walls of sound all over the place, much less the kind of wall of modular to my left. And just by being here during South by and moving around and kind of seeing what was happening, I started to come across this idea in myself of both getting away from the laptop, but also maybe getting away from the squiggles that modular is known for. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The squiggles and the thwacks and the plongs and the soundscape that I think a lot of maybe people who know a little bit about synthesis but aren't really going deeper about what's actually out now, I think that's one of the first things they encounter is like they see the sci-fi soundtrack that is, you know, kind of classic synthesizers, but that's not where it's at now. And so the basis of where I wanted to start to represent then was to take the sample-based material that I've been using on the Monome, get away from the laptop, and then find this gesture, this metaphor. So what I'm doing at Essence is using a DJ metaphor on the modular, with the centerpiece being the STS by 4MS, and then finding a way of the signal path, moving around the device in a way that is both audio affecting, but also directly listening to itself through envelope followers. And using that control voltage information to then kind of feed back into the effects chain to kind of recontextualize and kind of allow for the music to become more vibrational, more breathing, and less rulesy, as it would imply. I'm still using full tracks. I'm gonna eventually work with something more molecular, more, I don't know, something even FM or something crazy. There's a lot of possibilities on the horizon, but for my footprint, that's what I got. That's as much as I can afford right now, and I'm gonna play for you in a minute where it's at. But one of the other important things that I encountered in getting here was that modular, and especially Eurorack, is not just a measure of the modules that are giving you sound sources. It's also the length of your wires and the placement of the modules themselves. There's an architecture aspect to this. The architecture of the synthesizer, the width of your hand, the kind of way things can fit under fingers is of the utmost importance, especially if you're thinking that you are not only creating a sound, you're not only creating waves, you're also creating the instrument itself. And you have all the potential and possibility of thinking about what the ramifications of that those are. And although a lot of times modular is seen as being self-sufficient systems that you're not actually necessarily playing, I would propose, both because I'm doing it on stage, but also maybe in your own practice as you are out performing, that the gestural work you're doing has to both fit physically and comfortably into your hands, but also has to be performative to your audience. You have to think about where this sits in between you and your audience. The sound obviously only exists for them. For you, it's a very different intimate matter, both because maybe you're cueing things in advance or you already have prior knowledge, but also because the outcomes you're coming to are going to be unexpected for them and therefore more profound in that way. It's going to take them more time to catch up, perhaps. And for yourself, if your hands are are given chances to succeed, if you're given yourself the opportunity to create on the spot, I think both what will happen musically, but also what will happen in your own body gestures, your facial language, all these things that are expressing, it will be more performative. It will be more profound to your audience, and there's something in that. And as much as it sounds silly, also the electricity going on in your module, your Eurorack, your space, is going to also be of a question mark, because not only is it in your way or it's something that's being activated, but also if you're live patching especially, and those of you who maybe are trying that or thinking about live patching, it has its own difficulties, both because you can short out the entire instrument and just end the show, but also because your signal path will be of consistency and inconsistency. It'll be of modulation that you have to decide how quickly you can access, especially in situations that are compromised. Performance is a series of compromises and also a series of question marks. And so the more you can hone in on what you are overarchingly going for, the more chances of success you'll have. And that's going to be seen in the audience. The audience wants you to slip and fall and wants to see you deathify, but also wants you to get home. It's kind of the thing in music in general, right? They always want you to come home, which is odd because it's just a bunch of sound and air, but they want you home. So I'm going to perform for a short bit, if that's okay, if you want to switch over the laptop thing so you guys can get a better idea. Before I really start to play, I'm just going to go through my signal path with the screen, and therefore you can kind of see it maybe a little bit better. So at the very middle is this STS from 4MS. I'm using it in dual mono mode, so I'm running 2 samples, and they are my playheads, they are my turntables. That's the idea that I'm going for. Next to it is the next part of the chain. I'm running both channels into the Erica Synths Black X Fade. It's a crossfader, and it's meaty. The thing in top is chunky, and it's noise-free, and they make great units. And I had a hard time finding a crossfader, to be honest. It seems like such a basic integer of audio manipulation, and yet at the same time, Modular is still kind of catching up. There's like a lot of other metaphors that are very well expressed in the Modular space, but for some reason, not so much crossfading. Just not that thing yet. Next to it is the Overseer by WMD. That is kind of like an emulating of the Pioneer slopey filter that you find in a lot of standard DJ mixers, but this thing has way more control. I'm barely touching it. Most of these modules I'm barely utilizing just because of the lack of architecture in my machine, and also just what I want to try to access. But at the same time, the potential is there, and I love that indeed in these systems that there's like growth, and that maybe in a studio situation I could go vastly a different way, but in live performance I try to get my choices down to what my hands can do in addition to the electricity. So that WMD is quite useful. And then I go from there actually by this chord here all the way over to my Sputnik. This is an envelope follower and preamp combo that I believe, from what I've been told, emulates the Buchla envelope follower. It's probably the most clever piece of kit in my whole device, because it's doing just a bit of preamp gain staging, but even more importantly, it's allowing me to envelope follow the material that's coming out the very, like, you know, it's like, again, I'm using full tracks, so it's like a lot of material, and yet by doing the sensitivity control up here at the top, this little knob here, it allows me to really detail in exactly how much I want to grab from that and then spread around the instrument if I'm doing some live patching. So I'm moving from that over here to the All Right Instruments, to this tape delay emulator that is lush, it's lovely, and I'm using it in both modes. I'm using it as a tape delay and as a normal delay, and I'll tell you why in a second. But I'm also feeding that's where the majority of the signal information is going. So basically running from that envelope follower all the way down here into the sync mode, or the sync input on the All Right Instruments. That sync is constantly breathing and making choices. I let that thing just run, just let it roll, and let it kind of shift the sands underneath my fingers, so that I kind of have to keep on listening. I want to stay engaged with the machine. I want to not fall apart or just get used to it. It just wants it to be shifting sands. So from there, I'm going to the Herb Verb. The Herb Verb is functioning. It's a wonderful unit. Don't take this out of context at all. I don't really think of it like a reverb. I think it is a spatializer. It has a lot of color to it, has a lot of weight. And so I don't often hit it, but when I do, I'm controlling it with this Monome Ansible here on my left. And this I'm running with an arc. And it's just spinning ever so gently. It has a great physics. They make beautiful things. I love the Modem people. They're incredible. And so I'm using it as physics on the tilt function on the herb verb. And you'll hear that in a second. I'll go through that. And then I'm going over to the Rosie from Make Noise, which is a very easy, very kind of cantankerous out stage. And then next to it is the surprising hero of the bunch, because again, I'm not trying to use laptops. I'm trying to get away from the laptop. So I have a wave recorder now by 4MS. So on a given day, if it feels right, just hit record, or just hit it all the time. Just get things recorded, save things, try to capture moments, try to remember good nights, try not to have things just ebb away. I used to be addicted as a young producer in this idea of the ephemeral act of music making. Like you would make something and just let it ebb away. Like just make it, record it for a second, like break the CDR, and it was more perfect or beautiful. And then I regretted it. Like days later, I'd be like, well, what did I do? I was like, I don't really recall. And then it would be done. And then I just realized that just like everything's too precious. We shouldn't overemphasize or like hold on. But if we don't at least try for infinity, we're never going to get there. So another thing pouring in is on this poly and poly, I'm sending information from this. This is Rolly's light block. It's their lush little lovely beast. And it just natively is able to plug into the host on the poly and poly. This is very new for me, so I'm not using it as gesturally as important as it should be. But that little blue cable now is running over to the time function. So especially when I'm not using tape mode on the Octa, what is it? The all-right instruments? Was it?
Chronoblob, the all-right.
Chronoblob, exactly. Thank you very much. There's just a bunch of ghosts at the top, and they're obviously mean Chronoblob, but I had forgotten that because that's how the modular world works. Now, there's a few other really important functions that I'm not totally getting into, but like, for instance, pressure points here. That's going into the feedback functionality. It allows me to really rack the feedback on the Chronoblob. And then ears, I'm using them in the most basic way. They're an incredible modules, but I'm just using them simply to bang play on the STS. The most basic functionality, just boop, 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 boop. And they work well for that. They work increasingly well for that, especially how you can control the sensitivity on that so that they don't get sidechain banged from like a loud sound system or whatever. A few other units that are notable in here that I'm just not really getting into right now is the antimatter, these duo here, the subring and the crossfold. They're lovely sound activated weirdness. I wouldn't call them, either of them, just easily a ring modulator or a wave folder, because they want to be distorting, they want to be like pushing, and they're great for that. But in my case, they're just not fitting in today's thing, just like not how I'm using it. And I'm constantly playing with the space. There is only a finite amount, and I'm planning to take things out, put things in, just kind of constantly think about what I want to be doing in this kind of time that we're sharing. And that is important, because if I'm not thinking about it, the audience definitely will be the last to care. And I want them to care deeply about spending their money, spending their time, spending their attention, this the most valuable thing they can. So I take it not lightly at all. I am going to play a little bit. It's more comfortable than talking any day, so. that was a bunch of DJ-ish ideas, but done in the modular space. And so I hope you noticed I was queuing up samples both with the ears and the STS. Not so much to, again, to have them be rigidly combined, but to have the tracks talking to each other, to kind of have that breath between beats. Sometimes, in this case, they mostly agreed. They mostly were 4/4. I myself adore tracks that play with half time, double time, different time motions. Still going. Whew. That's the power of modular. Truly, it's just going. We have no very little control, just a lot of intention. So the idea is that you want the tracks. I mean, for me, I want the tracks not so much playing perfectly rigid together. I could just play a whole waveform that was an entire mix and then just do audio treatment on it. But rather, I want the tracks to communicate, make decisions on the spot based on the audience. In this case, it's not the easiest place to get a vibe, other than all the synths around. But that being said, or like the sunlight outside, this is like very unusual territory. But at the same time, it's kind of about just condoning and understanding and conducting and just kind of just trying to figure out where the songs want to go and where they lead to with the same intentionality. And then the effects are the same way. You just want that stuff to naturally fall under fingers so that you can have a gesture that either ends for the end of a phrase or kind of builds up tension or just kind of plays it unnicely so that the next thing that happens wants to either get back home, like I was mentioning before, or even more grandly for me, just become something that is outside of myself. If I can discover something in the wires that are outside of my own expectations, I'm doing something that makes me feel vital and alive, and hopefully that then is resonated in the greater audience or you just there. And modular gives me that in unique ways that a computer for myself never allowed. As much as the mono is a beautiful way of approaching sound, the computer itself, I find, increasingly is just a decision tree, a series of subfolders, not so much a place where I'm able to let my hands have an intelligence and make a design and decision. It's more so happening here than there for me right now. I hope to amend all that. I hope to increasingly include both worlds. I just need to take a break from that personally. And maybe you guys are asking yourself some of the same questions, either because of your modular practice or because of other ways that you're approaching sound. And I would encourage it if not. There's just too many options now. There's too many ways to say yes about these situations than the variety of no's that impose themselves all too often.
My entire perspective right now in the modular realm is trying to find a DJ metaphor. I really appreciate people who are using oscillators in these really creative fashions, creating sound environments that they're traveling through in the electricity of a CV, an envelope follower, some sort of processing. But for me, I'm coming from an audio background. I come from a performative space. I used to play double bass and bass clarinet in these instruments and always wanting to embody that. And so by having this DJ metaphor, I'm immediately reckoning with audio, and that's all ebbing from the STS by 4MS. It allows me to have gigantic sound samples and be able to immediately patch them through in just like in extremely creative fashions, using envelope followers like ears to detect audio changes from this kind of complicated sound soup and then be able to kind of process that through a number of channels. But this STS is really just genius in the fact that it allows me to just immediately wrestle with this material, rather than have it be an ancillary afterthought of audio that's been produced from a multiple amount of sources that has to then be blended. It's like immediate gigantic sound sources that then gets winnowed and willowed and stranged and strained and all that stuff. And it's everything to me right now. I'm really excited though about other people who are going to embrace this like audio all perspective and then see where it starts to go, because it's just the tip of the iceberg. Like, I don't feel like, unfortunately or fortunately, there's that many people doing that yet, even though I'm sure there's many people who have had similar gestures of a DJ metaphor, but just with these big sound sources. There just isn't that many modules that do that yet. So the STS is my secret weapon, I guess.
Did you see a move, someone doing something, be like, oh wait, I can do this now? What was one of the major impetuses to be like, okay, let's go drop $3,000 real quick?
I mean, it feels like that in the end. If you put it that way, then yes. But the truth of the matter is actually, so it was less about the 4MS or STS, because before I met this device, I had this big question mark about, is there a way to do sample-based music that's vigorous like I am used to with the mono, but without a laptop? That was my initial question. And increasingly, as I was asking the other round, it was either like, oh, we could make something super custom. I talked to a few makers that were like thinking in that space. I myself and you yourself,
we kind of did that.
We kind of participated in a project called the Daedelus, which is a beautiful little effects box that allows for some sample play, but it's not vigorous, huge files. And same thing with the mono. It was molecular. It was like I was dealing with these tiny expanses. So it's like, well, I want to think in different ways with my hands, and so what's possible? And so as I was asking people, like these increasingly incredibly difficult procedure were being available, like things like the Aleph that mono makes is like a full-on computer in like a little box, and it's a complete world, but you have to actually learn its programming language. Like I can barely speak English, much less learn a new programming language that's totally built from the ground up. I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around it. And so I was kind of lost in the woods, and I had this question, and again, like I wasn't asking the right question. That's what it comes down to. I wasn't reaching out to the community and being like, well, what is it that's out there? I was just kind of stuck in my echo chamber, being like, I want to do this, why can't I do this? And so when I finally, last NAMM show, I encountered the STS. That was kind of it. Like that was the moment of aha, like it exists. And it was as if I was asking the universe in a very Oprah fashion, and it just replied. It was.
Are amazing. You there?
Yeah.
Are you there, Bob?
Yeah. So it was one of those things where there was a big aha, and there's a few other companies that make very similar, comparable instruments now in modular. The STS was the one that featured and focused on the kind of uses that I want, but there's other things that have just come out recently. Morphogene is another interesting unit. I only am pointing vaguely to my left because that's where some of the synthesizers live, not because that's where the camera is. I apologize to the camera. Anyways, this was just the most comparable to the metaphor that I was looking for, and it just existed. So, and then I started asking the universe for other things, and it started to reply. Even better said, I actually asked people that were friends, like yourself and others.
Actual corporeal
things.
Okay. Yeah, because it reminds me of the same way you talk about getting into the mono the first time around, like seeing what's his name, Brian
Crabtree.
Yeah, Brian, like performing with a prototype version, and you're like, oh, that thing in my head. You can make that real, and so it's like you've had all these musical feelings that you've been able to express because all of a sudden there it is. Like, oh, this is what I always wanted. I didn't know that's exactly the way I wanted it, but it.
Well, and especially
real.
that kind of thing too, where there was a lot of times I was doing stuff on a computer and it was painful and took time, and then you find something in the world that can do it better, faster, with more intelligence or more intuitiveness that answers that, and then it becomes natural and performative. I feel like a lot of times the world is seen at a distance in music, where there's like sheet music, but there's music on that sheet music. That's what wants to be played. You don't want to play the sheet music, you want to play the music. And that's often the problem with equipment, is that you're playing the equipment and not the music that's in it. So it's kind of amazing that there's these systems that allow you to break that down.
And yeah, I'm sure a lot of people here that might be familiar with you from the past and seeing you do this, hearing you do this, and you're like, well, that still sounds like a Daedalus set, but it's with totally different hardware. And I think some people might have seen this and been like, that's not what modular is. You didn't make modular music. In the same way that when we teach some other classes here, they're like, well, that's not a synthesizer. It doesn't have any knobs on it. It's still a keyboard. Like the DX7, is it a synthesizer? Yeah. Well, there's no knobs on it. So like the difference of the context and this medium as a message kind of way. So did anyone kind of have that feeling about it? I don't know. Now I'm very intimidated.
Not the wiggles, not the blips and bleeps.
Yeah.
And I hope to incorporate more blips and bleeps and wiggles. I want to get back there. I want to have some LFO sounds, and they're intrinsically part of the music too. So it's like, it was obviously, some of the music I'm playing was made with modular, or some of the music I'm playing was made with modular gestures. And so what is simulacra, what is real? And a lot of people would point at this and say that I'm just playing samples, and is that music? And of course, that's a beautiful conundrum to have. That's a great overarching question that DJs have been asked for years. Are they a musician and valid? And I would of course offer a yes, but I think it's totally fine to say no and to have an argument about that. As long as it doesn't lead to fisticuffs, we're good.
Right.
Yeah.
Except DJs did invent modern poppy music. Anyway. So, do we have any questions right now? We're going to keep talking about this stuff, but you guys got any ideas? I think this gentleman with the hair.
Yeah, I do have a question.
Hey, wow.
So when you're cueing on the ears,
yeah.
is there a way to adjust, like, is there a sync, or is it just you're cueing it all live, and if you're off a little bit, you have to re-cue it?
There's two things. I can of course re-cue just by banging again on the ears, but actually what I'm doing partially is I'm slowly bringing in tracks, and then you see this pitch knob here, and that allows me to basically adjust the pitch to catch it. But of course, it's very easy to gallop the track faster or slower.
Yeah.
I'm generally playing samples that like to live in the same space, so either similar BPMs or similar feels that I can find the way in. So you'll notice that I'm not touching the pitch too often. I'm trying to stay away from that, because just like on a turntable, when you lose that sense of togetherness, when you lose your kind of like, this is home and then this is going to be the next where I'm going with that, it's very easy to kind of to find that you're just lost at sea, especially because I'm not cueing in headphones.
Yeah.
But it's a technique that I've been using for years with things like Serato and otherwise. Like the idea of headphones in these other spaces, especially when you have a thing you can bang on, you get used to the slope of the bang, so to speak. You get used to the speed to which the control catches up. So on ears, they're very responsive. Like most things in modular, it's extreme responsiveness. There's very little lag on anything. And you get used to that over time with your fingers. And so you get, like I've only been performing with this setup for the past about 6 months, but I'm getting kind of in tune with now what it takes to kind of have things be aligned, or at least breathing together. That's actually the great joy too, is to have things not perfectly synced. And just like that friction, which then leads towards great transitions or terrifying, like quickly crossfade. Erica's great about that. The Erica crossfader is really good about fast, quiet movement.
Do you want to maybe go through kind of what you were just playing there? Can you show triggering a track real quick?
Yeah,
kind
sure.
of on its own?
Yeah.
For people who aren't also touring DJs?
So, and I know there's kind of a complicated series of moves I have to make. But it's not really. I mean, it's really quite simple. It's just as simple as bang. So I'm going to bring up the right channel. So let's say the right deck. I'm going to use the DJ terminology. And so the Erica has a level here for the second input. The cool thing too, partially, I should say this, is that one of the joys of modular synthesis, those of you who may be slightly intimidated, is you can usually look at where the wires are going and understand the function of things. Is something the sound source? Is it traveling from that unit, or is there things going? Thank you. Yeah, I can just get lower, higher. I have this power. There's a lot of visual architecture at play. So those of you who may be out there and intimidated by these setups, just look at what the person's doing and just take the time to see where the wires are going, and it'll make some sense. So, bang, 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 bang. It's that simple. So
each time he's touching that little, it looks like a touchpad, but it's actually a little microphone underneath, and it just starts the track off just as we would. We hit on something on the drum machines back here, an MPC, something else. It's triggering the sample, it's starting the sample at the beginning.
Now, if I didn't go out of the gate output of the ears, if I went out of the envelope or one of the other microphone kind of outputs, it would have a similar effect, but just have a different feel on how it would give out that bang to the unit itself. And ears is really clever about that. It allows you a lot of options. The input-output function especially is interesting, although I'm not using it right now. So once banged, track starts where I have it set. So the beginning of the track in this case, this is the... There's a lot of stuff about that.
Scrub through the... Okay.
Totally scrub through things. Yeah. So, okay, so this is the basic idea, but what I'd like to grow towards, and what I first talked with the people at 4MS about when I visited their booth at the NAMM show this last year, and I was first acquainted with this, was the idea of nonlinear DJing seems really interesting to me. It's something I accessed a bit when I was using the Monome as like sound source as what it means and what it's saying and what it's playing, but also sound source as like a time machine, where if you can access different parts of a track instantaneously, and especially if you can access those with some amount of intelligence towards what the track is doing, you can create structures and ideas that are like kind of away from the typical linear DJing idea of all you can do is move a record forward or move it backward with greater speed or less speed. That's what a turntable does at essence. So the idea of being able to scrub or access parts on the fly is going to be a really wonderful eventuality that I really believe is going to be possible. And I could describe more about what it means, but it sounds kind of silly add access. I think it makes more sense under fingers. So I'm just going to scrub around a little bit, and you can hear that sound at least. So if I actually change the length that's at play here, it allows me to, without hitting the re-bang button on the ears. So I know it sounds strange, but the possibility of using it both as a sound source, but also at essence as a kind of granular synthesizer is interesting. And I think at essence, like it's going to do something fundamental the way I perform eventually. I'm not there yet, but I love the fact that, like most modular stuff, there's a lot of future. It's not future. It's like future-proof in that way that you can kind of add and subtract and multiply, but also just like there's more depth to almost all this equipment that I'm even touching on, partially just because I only have 10 fingers. But the electricity, the CV, control voltage information gives me a lot more access. And eventually, when I have the right systems to allow me to perform, it's going to be, I think I'm going to find a lot more to discover in that. And that's what excites me.
And I think what people might have heard that time around is the fact that you are not locked into something with it. You are not playing CDJs up here. You don't have like the Serato interface where it's always going to play in time. You have given yourself enough patch cord to hang yourself with. And you can always fall off and do something weird. And I think that's interesting because your stuff for a while has been like you have intentionally really, you know, angles happening all the time.
Yeah.
And so this allows you, do you feel that you are closer to the precipice of falling off and getting weirder with it, or you're trying to like come back in?
No, 100%. It's about, so in some ways I've made it more normal, DJ normal, but then you'll notice, and even in that short performance that I did earlier, there's a lot of moments where it's just like, why is the delay carrying on a little bit? Or why is there these kind of abrasive moments in the herb verb, for instance? And it's partially because I really am interested in the potential of tension coming not only from the music intended, but also from the gesture itself. That there can be a tension and release that comes from the way you play into something. And again, like the idea of aftertouch is kind of a new thing in a lot of these instruments. The idea of a gesture having lag in physics is somewhat new, and a lot of CV with their slew controls and otherwise allow for a lot of these possibilities. And I'm looking for more of those systems to add. I'm looking for more ways to have the machine itself kind of talking back to me, making decisions, giving me input, and then making the performance more vital and kind of hard to play, which is great because as a performer, you want to lift, you want to be doing, activated.
Yeah, difficultly made easy listening. Something no, it's not.
That's yes, yeah. Thanks, John. Like that's great.
Do we got any other questions before? Yeah.
Some records that are translate automatically to being performed live at 1 a.m.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the question for our YouTube at home audience is how do you balance, how do you make a record, how do you produce the record, how do you put it out there, how do you DJ, all these different facets of that, how do you reconcile them, and how do you decide creatively which one you're doing? Is that kind of what you're...
So like, how do you take a record that maybe sounds like a Sunday morning and make it sound like a club, like at 1 a.m.? Right?
How do you take Easy Like Sunday Morning and make how does one make a banger of Easy Like Sunday Morning?
So I definitely have two approaches to this, and I these are my own choices I've made. I definitely don't, I don't think these are the right or wrong choices, but I've made really disparate records. Like of the number of records I've put together, some of them are almost entirely acoustic, and some of them are a little bit more like very much going for electronicness and maybe more playable, more rigid, more BPM. But to a T, you don't choose what people like. And I'll play events where somebody, no matter how ravety rave it is out there, they want that acoustic guitar. And like, it's not happening. It's not shoehorning necessarily. So I've taken two approaches. For the longest time, since 2008, I decided not to play my own music when I played live. I wanted to take other people's music that was well situated for a situation and try to find the granular amount of it that I could perform on the mono, for instance. and really under finger find my sound in it, like kind of my gesture, my remix, whatever you want to call it, and render it into that space by play, by like vigorous play, make somebody else's huge sound and translate it into my version, I guess, or my offering to an audience. And the other is that kind of thing of you take that acoustic guitar and you reduce it down to a unit that can still be recognizable, but maybe uncomfortably or inventively inserted into that situation. So a lot of times, even when those nights when I'm playing bangers, but I get a request, I love requests, because it gives me a chance to kind of try to come up with a universe or something. You do this thing where you kind of give the audience all the sugar so that when you come across with your strange, like sour or whatever it is that needs to be on that night, that it becomes like hopefully at its best, like that good DJ moment where you get the thing in because it is a opening of a vista. It's like a meadow you discover after a dense forest, or quite the opposite, that you basically have dived deep enough underwater that you've drowned, and then you just have these kind of moments where the accordion is out of breath, so to speak. I know it sounds like I'm using a lot of funny terms, but basically you just find your opening and you seize it. And it may be the wrong time for that sound to appear, and yet you'd be often surprised by how open an audience is, especially after you've kind of performed into them, where you've not necessarily catered to them because you don't want to pander, but you want to be in tune with them. And if you're truly in tune, you can do anything. Like DJs have one of the most powerful positions in the world where they can play the most ridiculous stuff, but if it's after the right song, it's everything. It works. And I've seen it happen again and again. The best DJs just do anything they want, and just it's incredible. And that's what you've signed up for a lot of times. We live in a little bit of a different musical environment nowadays. A lot of times people want the sing-along, they want the expected, they bought that ticket, so to speak. But I still think there's something about playing the unknown or playing into the unknown that is exciting. And usually, again, if you're excited on stage, if you're discovering on stage, the audience will recognize that, in my belief. And then finally, of course, the way people listen is so vastly different nowadays. It's so different in the sense that they're not going to listen to a whole album. And so if you're still creating detailed music, there's every possibility always, because you're probably not making it for this like huge swath or mass of people. You're probably making it for dedicated, true blue, like, people who listen well and deeply, and anything's possible with those people. Just changing your facing a bit. Yeah.
You kind of you mentioned it kind of a few times around where you're still having to prove that you're making something on stage in a way, and that could be real. That could be like, oh, well, I know these people don't think I'm doing this, or it could be from within. We think we still have to prove, musicians in general, we have to prove ourselves. No, really, I made this. Yeah. And kind of going with this last question, you're not playing your own stuff out as much, and you just have this album out, so you're on tour, you're promoting an album, but you're not playing the album. And so do you feel that playing this Eurorack now, and you've kind of answered this, but just in a different way, are you proving yourself more on stage that you are a creator to people who coming in being like, well, who's this guy with lots of vowels in his name? As opposed to, because when you were hitting buttons before, it's like, okay, people are like, oh, he's got buttons up there. All right, I understand buttons. Okay, now he's got wires up there. So do you think you're breaking through to more people?
No, I mean, I think the move to modular is not one of a greater ease of performance. It's not of where the audience knows, okay, oh, he's using modular, I get it. Like, no, sadly, that's really we're not there yet.
I mean, that's why I'm asking why you're just shooting yourself directly in the foot.
I think the most descriptive thing we can do is be passionate performers, and that letting that show up on our face and in our body, and people get that. I oftentimes use this metaphor, but it's very true. Very few people understand how to play guitar, but a lot of people know guitar face. And it's a painful place. It looks troubled, but we understand that intrinsically that work is being done, that somehow that too many strings is being played by too few fingers, and that work is happening. And by doing that, the guitarist is performing, even if you don't know where the hands are. I would love to make the performative possibilities on modular more obvious, but potentially more buttons, more bangable pieces, maybe tilting the modular forward. There's lots of different conclusions that I came to with the Monum that I'm hoping to get to here. But I'm still reckoning with the space myself. And so how am I expecting the audience to? And part of that is just by passionately getting into it, not letting the distraction of the wires get me away from twisting knobs or playing onto pads. But it is an ongoing conversation that's going to have to happen. And also there's this other powerful thing too, that when you're performing, you can display that performance or you can hide in your performance. There's something about having an avatar, a name, whatever it is, that allows you to possibly shield yourself rather than be in front of it and be part of it. And so you can have teachable moments on stage where, say, you make a mistake and then you correct it in a way that is either including the audience or guarding against. So I say be more inclusive, show your mistakes proudly, do something multiple times, allow the gesture to happen widely and loudly, and make your pained faces that you choose to make rather than practice in a mirror to be as calm and secretive as possible. Somebody talked about like magic tricks once where you're supposed to make it look easy. But I don't think that's the case at all. You're supposed to make it the grand thing. The disappearing thing has to disappear. You can't just have something fall away unseen. It has to be bright and powerful and blinding how much that thing disappeared. Kind of. So be obvious about your disappearing.
So play the final countdown as much as you can in a DJ set is what I got from that. Cool.
I haven't done it yet, but
Okay.
it might be time.
Got any questions? We're good.
Can you talk a little bit about talking about performance and showing people, but kind of over time it seems like things more performing to get smaller and
Yeah.
a little more you focus more on what's going on. How do you, while you're doing all this, still be grand, be open for the audience?
Yeah. I mean, there is an intentionality of it. Like, give yourself the opportunity to succeed in these kind of ways. Give yourself the architectural space to span. It's one of the cool things about this versus a control system that exists. A lot of these control systems, a lot of grid-based systems that I've participated in, the Monum precursed a lot of that. And I'm, again, luckily been using it for those 15 years. But even in those kind of systems, like a lot of it like tends to compact in terms of the usable space. And the same thing's true here, but trying to spread the gestural metaphors around the instrument, for instance, and also giving yourself the opportunity to discover on your own instrument. If everything's pre-programmed, if everything's very neat and natural, even if you know there's like a ballet to be done, if it's too much that there's no chance for failure, there won't be any room for success. It'll just be what it will be. And I think the audience can sense that to a degree. They can sense a tight choreography that is error-free and air-free. And then also, a lot of times with these instruments, because a gesture can be so powerful, you have to put it aloud into the air for it to be heard. So don't be afraid of that either. Like, play like into the noise rather than work for the clean or the perfect. It is different with different systems. I do appreciate very much that if you're trying to really recreate a song, say, or play a melody, there might need to be hands in a certain position just to encounter that. But at the same time, your body has a language as well. The way you face your instrument, the position you put your instrument in. There's a lot of calculations you can make even in advance of the performance itself, where just you give yourself the ability to have your body seen, your face seen on a stage, or obscured in ways that then heighten the interest for the audience. I know it sounds really performance 101, but if you just think about the stuff a little bit in advance, like just think about how will the audience see you, from what sight lines can they see you, what the lighting is going to do, what opportunities it's going to afford you. The visual does end up being a very loud part of the sound. But indeed, especially with this, like I find myself all the time diving in, and especially if I have a mistake and I kind of lose that grandness, that facing towards the audience, I'm hunkered down in a wire trying to get things in. And modular is hard that way, and I'm still figuring out that for myself. But I also know that if you're cognizant of the ability to kind of freeze up or like face off, that you can find your way back out of that as well, which is kind of sometimes its own interesting struggle for an audience to like, what's going on? That confusion could be a turnoff, but then if you just let them discover with their time, there's, if you have the hour to perform, might as well use all of it to discover together what that performance can mean in intention and total.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah.
Nick?
Can you talk a bit about how you make decisions and how do you or how open, how tight are you on that, and
Yeah.
how do you think about that?
How do you think about your timing changeovers? How do you decide when to cut, when to drop, when
Yeah.
to do what you do?
With traditional DJing, there's a lot of counting up to 4, counting your bars of 16, knowing when the drop is going to be. I think with this opportunity, there's a lot of those kind of bones, so to speak. But then at the same time, because you can play differently, you can play noisily, you can play. There's a lot of playing against the expectation, or creating your own amount of noise, and like increasing the inertia forward to supersede the kind of built-in parts of a track. And I adore a good DJ who knows exactly harmonically when the right next moment's going to be, and like, or you even can almost like sing the words and have the next song's words perfectly matched. There's something very beautiful about that. But at the same time, it's very much, you're very much to the mercy of the music, and you have to have an intimate knowledge of everything. Versus with a system like this, I'm using the delays and the reverb and creative tensions that hopefully can even during like a 3 count could create the possibility of a transition based on the roll of a delay or the push of a verb. I was playing pretty mellow 4/4 music there, but at the same time, you get the delay clopping along maybe in a way that creates a new superseded tempo, and then that could be your next. There's basically a lot of opportunities to create clouds or noises or differences that then will get you out. And I think that's where it's really interesting. It may be maybe a lot of cacophony for the audience, but that sometimes is just trying to develop a new language with them, trying to get a new opportunity to have a different gesture. But then, dang, just knowing your tracks is good too, right? Making those tracks. I do think, and this could be a sidebar, I do think there's a new understanding of polyrhythm in our audiences. I think over time, especially for electronic audiences where 4/4 was like de rigueur, was like the overarching idea, and then when you had a breakbeat or something else, it was like a novelty, and this was like years ago, and so then over time, you have jungle music and otherwise that are like just playing polyrhythm, but now we have this opportunity for like true, like 3 against 4 or like very unusual rhythms and timing systems are now being introduced, partially because of clever modules that are out there that allow you to do sub-timing ideas that are kind of free from 4/4, free from breakbeats. And I increasingly hear that just happening on records and then also in live performances, but not necessarily the two finding each other. And so I think that's going to be a really interesting space when people really seize on that. Like we're going to hear some real club music in 5. Sounds super silly right now, but I guarantee you it's happening. It's just happening in subtle ways that we're not totally aware of yet. It's going to get louder and louder and more dominant soon, I think.
Talking about rhythm in modular system, and not to say that modular is a musical genre, but who are you looking at these days to say like, oh, these people are doing interesting new things in modular that I'm going to look at using these new tools?
Richard Devine. Yeah, Richard Devine is number one for me. He is an absolute crazy person when it comes to his musical soundscape. I would really recommend checking out his music, his sound design, his patches, his presets, and almost every synthesizer that you own that's modern. He's an incredible creator that way. I also really like the music that EEPROM has been making. EEPROM features a lot of modular, not so much on stage necessarily, but Lord, the things he is coming up with in the studio with modular is absolutely enormous. And then Caitlin Aurelia Smith and her live patching performances that are truly getting at the heart of what modular in tradition and moving forward can be. She's astounding, absolutely. And then there's a lot of greats too. There's a lot of people who are just using it as a sidebar. Like I had a tour with Lapalux not too long ago, and he was using modular in ways that was really compelling, just in contortion with the computer. So he was kind of creating a back and forth between the two systems that was great. Yeah, there's tons.
Yeah, there's tons, but it's also a very new field that's developing, and that's why I'm very cautious about calling this a genre. And when we were talking earlier, it's like if we look at this modular, there's no oscillators. We have an envelope follower. We have a couple things that can make envelopes, but again, just like we were saying with the synthesizer, if it doesn't have knobs on, it's not a synth.
Right.
Like this is a very different thing, and I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of it.
I think so too.
yeah.
Yeah, I think the possibilities are just being invented. And one thing I would say to you all here, challenge you or those maybe watching, this is a new enough field that if you have a compelling question that's not being answered in existence, it's very likely that if you talk to the creators of these things, they may be spurred to make from your ideas, or you yourself are not far away from being able to make these ideas yourself. They may not be polished in a way that, you know, maybe fits easy next to these other Eurorack things, but it's not hard to have breakout boxes and have things talking in ways and have them kind of exist on their own that answer your questions, that get to your sound. And it's just here. It's just a format ready to be utilized. It's incredible that way. We're at the very verge of a whole new wave of essentially a musical revolution that's only being hinted at. And it's just now. It's incredible to be living at this time where this is possible.
Yeah, we don't even know what we don't know about this thing so far. So, if we got any more good questions, yes, Johnny.
So I've noticed like you're using a lot of like your most like expressive controls to control parameters on effects.
Yeah.
And I wanted to see if you had anything else to say about sort of like the alternate concept of using like an effect as an instrument.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So the question was, you're modulating a lot of effects, but you're not using effects as in themselves. You're doing some feedback tricks with the Chronoblob, but you're not relying on them. You don't have like crazy swells. Like you still hear the clips. You still hear your tracks no matter what usually.
Not entirely, and I appreciate that. And I would say that part of it is playing it safe in this time, but there is a lot of things where the effect is the sound source, especially with these heavily, like, there's a reason I picked Herb Verb and the Chronoblob is because they're very, they have a lot of opinion, basically. They have a lot of sound to them. They want to be expressive in these ways, and I'm hoping to add more. I'm looking forward to adding the
Spectral multiband.
Spectral multiband, yes. That thing is insane from 4MS as well, and that has a lot of attention. It just has a sound to it, a resonant sound to it. So when you have these units that are effects at essence, but they have so much opinion, they help make decisions for you, partially because of that, but also you eventually I'm hoping to be able to play them almost as if they're transitionary pieces or as entire songs themselves, where they become the sound source that you're actually playing more so than the original intended material. And part of that is, I think the original idea of the STS is that it would be using short sounds, because the sounds that comes with it aren't very long generally. They're these impulses, right? One-shots and impulses that you can either loop or have as one-offs. And the way that might go around a unit, one of your setups is kind of implied immediately, but then of course by having longer samples you just have a greater series and density of sounds, but even more so the effects themselves also play a big role into that. And I think part of it is that all these systems, although they have to be played by hand, by having the extra amount of control voltage allow you to kind of increase the power to which that these things can then be utilized as full sound sources. There's going to be more of that too. I see it already. There's a lot of units that already are very opinionated, let's say. Wave folders and that kind. They're just like, zzz, yeah.
Well, we all look forward to the way you're going to use these modules that other people see in a pretty straightforward way of like, oh, this is out of an MS-20. It's like this now. So we all really look forward to what you and other people are going to be doing with these modules. And of course, we can find you all over the internet.
And hopefully closer. I mean, I think more importantly than the internet is going to be at shows or at community get-togethers. If you're ever in LA, let's get a coffee, this kind of thing. I'm kind of done with, I mean, I love espousing on Twitter or whatever, but it's not this.
Agreed.
There's way more powerful things we can do as a community to play our music, and often it's out loud, and I would rather be out loud in person as well.
Well, cool. Thank you so much again, Alfred Daedelus.
Thanks. Thanks, Switched On, for doing this. It's incredible.
So this has been Daedalus. I am so happy to be sharing this ideas with you. I hope it sparks something of a travesty, something of a, forces you to go out and make some sound. That's That's the thing, right? Let's go make some music. I think I encountered Switched On for the first time at a South by Southwest. I'm sure it's a story that's familiar to many. Being in Austin for like this very purposeful, very sprawling, messy festival that I played maybe one too many gigs, and as I was wandering the streets, probably searching for more breakfast tacos, encountering this oasis on 11th Street, right? Like this kind of small shop where the air conditioning was barely dealing with the number of bodies in the room, and just the most cantankerous sound ebbing forth from all these hands on ancient synths. It's heaven. This is home. This is where I want to live, in sound. And I just immediately struck up a conversation, I don't remember exactly who it was, but just about kind of this creaky old drum machine I have. It's a Circuit Band 606. Just talking about it and being a passionate fan of these kind of things myself, but then immediately found somebody who kind of reflected some of my own passion, and we sprawled into other matters, other drum machines, and they just took something off the wall, and it was immediately like love at first bleep. And I'm been coming back ever since, and it's always an adventure. It's always something new to discover on the racks. So I'm an ever fan. I'm true blue. Yeah.